Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. We are going to be speaking to you about safe schools and specifically looking at estate management, what the current picture is for school buildings, and the role of boards within that. I'm joined by Rani, who's the head of advice at NGA. So Rani's going to be doing half the webinar. I'm going to get things started. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sam Henson, the Director of Policy and Communications at NGA. So my next slide, please, Sabrina. Oh, I should say we've also got Sabrina with us, who's going to be moving the slides. So you'll hear us talking to Sabrina as we go along. Just a few very quick housekeeping points. We aim to keep the webinar around half an hour, might be slightly more, but certainly no more than 40 minutes. Appreciate that some of you will be joining us on your lunch break, and we'll try and stick to time. If you do have to go early, then you can catch up with the recording, which will be available very soon after the webinar itself, certainly later on this week. So you can catch up if you need to later on. Everybody except for myself and Rani will be muted during the webinar. The chat function is open, but because it's quite a short session and really very much an introduction to the topic, we won't be answering questions as we go along. We will try and get back to anything that that people have raised, if we possibly can, but I'm sure we appreciate we won't be able to get back to everything. So if you do have other questions, and particularly if you're a gold member, please do reach out to the advice team as well. We've also got some brand new guidance on this topic, which will be mentioned a bit later as well. The slides will be sent out, and like I said, the recording will also be available. So yeah, if you can move me along, please, Sabrina. Brilliant. Well, just to say, obviously, the start of this academic year, this particular topic has probably been has never been as prevalent as it has been within recent weeks. Obviously, the news that started the academic year, with the issues around concrete in schools, I think picked up a lot of press interest, a lot of debate and discussion around actually what needs to happen regarding school buildings. We're going to come on to some of that in a moment, and obviously, unfortunately, some schools saw the start of their term significantly delayed or disrupted as a result of that. So we're going to be talking about some of those concerns. We're then going to look at the role of the governing boards, and then also look at the different strategies and explain how governing boards need to approach their responsibilities in relation to the entirety of the school or trust estate. What I should say is this webinar really does accommodate both governing boards within maintained schools and trust boards, whether that's single academy trust or a multi-academy trust. There are some differences which we'll explain along the way, but the guidance that we've done itself does break it down into more of the specifics as well. So you can look at that. Next slide, please, Sabrina. Thank you. Okay, so just to talk about briefly some of the concerns that have very much surfaced within recent weeks, but also the months prior to that, and indeed the long-term issues that have widely been talked about in terms of school estates for a significant amount of time now. The reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete rack, as we've come to know it, issue is obviously the thing that has been channeling the discussion in recent weeks, and it was certainly not a phrase or a set of words that I ever expected would be one of the most one of the things that I've written about or talked about most over the last few weeks. But it has become a massive issue. It's a huge concern for many school leaders and teachers and school staff and governing boards, clearly. But as big a deal as the RAC issue is, we shouldn't let it distract us from what is a much bigger topic, and the purpose and condition of both school and trust estates is huge. And I think there's a lot for us to tackle in a very short space of time today. But I think estates management really is something that needs to be at the very heart of the governing board's role. It's not a deficit activity, or at least it shouldn't be. But much of this webinar clearly is going to be looking at the issue from the perspective of what has emerged in recent months and recent years. But we do need to look more widely beyond that. I think ensuring schools are safe, and specifically that buildings are fit for purpose, is clearly not a new issue. But there's more prominence on it as an issue at this point in time. There are 21,600 state schools in England, so that's a huge number of schools. Some standalone, some part of a multi-academy trust or a federation. But within that, that number of schools, they educate 8.4 million pupils. So between them, that's a huge responsibility. And these schools have around 64,000 buildings in total. And those buildings vary in age, in design. 64,000 buildings, that is a huge number, and we all know that schools are not the simplest of buildings by any stretch of the imagination, and they come in different sizes, different needs, vastly different ages and forms of construction as well. So this is a huge discussion that's really attempting to cover an awful lot. So if you are worried about the state of your school estates, you are definitely not alone. Overall, the condition of the school estate in general nationally is widely accepted to be in decline. There are safety concerns about some types of building, some types of materials used in buildings. We've of course had different stages of initiatives, of investment over the years, as well as some would argue inactivity on school buildings as well over the years. Perhaps one of the biggest initiatives that most of us can remember was the Building the Schools for the Future programme, which led to many new builds, but that wasn't without its issues either. But predominantly it came at a huge cost, and it targeted secondaries, and also large swathes of it was reliant on the project being funded in part by private finance and initiatives, which we are now, of course, coming across a lot of the issues that they cause, particularly as schools that have those PFI contracts, as they're joining trusts and different things, lots of problems associated with that. So regardless of how you look at it, I think there's lots of issues that we need to tackle and think back to, as well as looking forwards. Back in 2017, it was reported that while progress was being made in improving the very poorest conditioned schools, the nation's school estates its overall condition was reported by the NAO as being expected to worsen as buildings in poor but not the worst condition deteriorated further. So as is often the case, it was that reactive drive that was looking at those that were really in dire need, which was getting some of the attention, but those school buildings that were not that far behind it didn't get that same level of attention. And as I said earlier, we've now started the 2023 academic year, with this being highlighted in an incredibly dramatic way, really. The urgent issues related to RAAC really, I think, have further intensified this as a national issue that already was causing major concern among boards who are already dealing with that high pressure workload and responsibility of reacting to numerous challenges, including the long-term implications of the pandemic and the teacher and recruitment crisis and so on. So without kind of sounding too downbeat about this stuff, I think actually, we recognise, and I think everyone recognises, that this is a genuinely massive issue that comes at a time when schools and trusts and governing boards are dealing with an awful lot. There's a lot of complexities within the sector to be dealing with right now, and there are other things as well. Asbestos has been a long-term problem, and will continue to be so. There are just some buildings that just were never designed in a way that meant they were fit for purpose in the first place. So I think we've also got to factor in that as well. If you could take me on to the next slide, please, Sabrina. Thank you. So I mentioned the NAO reports earlier. This actually was published earlier on in the year, so before the RAAC issue really came to light in the way it did in at the end of the summer. But really, as these points show, it gives you a very clear indication of the scale of the problem and the sorts of issues that we are working with here. New evidence coming to light at various points in time that the DfE has to react to, and I think that was one of the things that caused that panic at the end of the summer, as that new evidence came to light over the summer for the DfE in terms of the RAAC assessment and the major concerns that was then driving. The NAO report was alarming to say the least, and I think it really brought to light just how significant this is as a national issue. It ultimately concluded that following years of issues with buildings being allowed to carry on, the estate's overall condition is ultimately declining, and around 700,000 pupils are learning in a school that the responsible body or the DfE believes needs major rebuilding or refurbishment. So I think we do need to acknowledge that the DfE has recognised that there are significant safety concerns across the estate, and it has escalated these concerns to the government risk register. But there is, probably, I think it's fair to say, little by way of kind of assurance for many of you as a result of that. I think we need action. There is still a big issue with reliable and up-to-date data with which the DfE is working with, which, you know, when we look at things like the RAC surveys, for example, there were issues surfacing on a daily basis in terms of how they were used and how the assessments were made. What the NAO report did show was there is ultimately a big gap in the story. No one really knows just how big the problem is, how severe the safety concerns are, and where they're concentrated. So it reinforces ultimately the incredibly crucial role of the governing board in striking a confident assessment themselves in what needs to be done with their school or their group of schools. Obviously put into one side for a moment whether there's money or not to address that. I do think, you know, we will all recognise that money is by far one of the biggest hindrances, and it is going to remain so. There are other priorities that need to be addressed, so expertise within the system, training for those who have a role with the school estate. But you know, it's unlikely. If we think back to last week, the IFS reported that the injections of funding that have come through the school's revenue streams and in recent years has really gone very much to helping keep schools afloat. It's very unlikely that we're going to see vast amounts of new capital money flooding into the system, regardless of who wins the next election. So you know, I think this is something that, yeah, we all know that money is really the thing that is needed, but ultimately there's not enough of it to drive the improvements needed. So there are other things that we need to look to as well. Next slide, please, Sabrine. Thank you. So hopefully you'll be aware that we do an annual governance survey every year. For the first time last year, we asked governors and trustees what they thought about this topic, and almost 4 in 10 told us that their buildings were not in good condition. And you know, that kind of really drives home the message that this isn't just about the outlier schools that were affected at the beginning of the term by the RAC issue, but much more prominent issue than that. The current measures that have been in place primarily have been reactive, and so NGA, as part of our newly published manifesto that we released last week, is calling for a renewed focus on estates and environment sustainability as well as part of that. So have a look at our manifesto. We go into a bit more detail there. Next slide, please, Sabrine. I'm just going to talk for a moment about compliance and then going beyond compliance before I hand over to Rani. The idea of this webinar and us talking and introducing this as a topic really is to not limit it to the perspective of compliance, which I think casts a very narrow view of the extent of the asset that estates are. But there are clearly some musts that, regardless of strategy and culture, need to be prioritised. The board's strategic oversight role includes very specific needs in terms of conducting and managing the estate properly as part of the operational requirements of being responsible for that organisation. That strategic oversight really needs to involve seeking assurances that the school or trust is complying with legal requirements, but also for boards that are the legal employer, there's that legal responsibility for health and safety as well. And regardless of whether you are the legal employer or not, all boards have that key role in ensuring health and safety of their organisations. So go and have a look at the guidance itself, where we break down the key matters of compliance. But I also want to now move to what we mean by beyond compliance. If you could take me to the next slide, please, Sabrine. So this is really a question, I think, of culture and values, and how do we move beyond the bare minimum at a time when we face so many other challenges. It's easier said than done in the current financial climate. But sometimes I think to scrimp and save, it's a bit of a false economy. By going for the cheapest fix, as with many things, it doesn't always last. There is a need for boards to make those their own brave decisions. Obviously, that is an incredibly difficult thing to do given current circumstances, but to make sure there is that commitment to ensuring safer schools, regardless, and making sure that is a top agenda item. I don't think school estates have always been given the prominence that they need to have in those discussions, and we've seen some really mixed practice with that. But looking at different strategies, whether it's the long-term financial benefits by investing more now, how you approach efficiency. I think the environment aspect is really key, because more and more schools and trusts are going to be thinking about how does their environmental strategy work with their estates management strategy. The two very much go hand in hand. Boards are increasingly making environmental sustainability an organizational priority, and that's clearly going to have to ramp up. So in doing that and starting to approach that now, building environmental considerations into that estates management strategy, thinking about the 4 C's that NGA have identified, which is sustainability, is as a campus, I think is really important. So I'm just very aware of time. I'm talking a lot, so if you could move me along, please. Responsible bodies, just quickly wanted to mention this, because it was one thing that the Education Secretary of State did mention at the time when the RAC story broke out, and talked about responsible bodies needing to do more. But we did really challenge that at the time, because it almost sounded a bit like we were being told that the boards were not doing enough, and the DFE subsequently said that isn't what the message was at all. But that said, there is clearly a need to think about that role as a responsible body, what that involves. Ultimately, the DFE is ultimately there to be making sure there is enough in the system to get us to where we need to be in terms of school estates. But the role of responsible bodies, regardless of whether your governing board is legally the responsible body or not, we would expect all governing boards to have this key role in estate management. If you take me to the next slide, please, Sabrine. So I'm just going to talk quickly about governance arrangements and then hand over to Rani. Very much the purpose of governance in estate management is, as we said, to provide that strategic leadership, to think about how you can demonstrate accountability robustly to your stakeholders through the way that you manage your estates. I think your stakeholders need to know and have confidence that you're going to be taking care of pupils. From a parental perspective, I think that's incredibly important. But then also that key stewardship role, that oversight of both educational and financial performance, and how the estates within your school or your group of schools enables your educational ambitions to turn into reality. So I think it's really important for governing boards to have a very clear understanding of how estates management fits into the wider strategy of the board, and also within that drive for a brighter tomorrow, that vision as well. Estates management, I think, needs to form more of a part of that thinking going forwards. Clarity on estate management functions, I think, are really key, particularly, if you're in a MAT. Is there a role at local level or not? I think that would be determined by the trust themselves. But I think within a trust, if you are part of a trust, the role of the central team is incredibly important. The CFO in particular. If you are a maintained school, clearly there is still a need to work with the local authority as well on a regular basis, and to not see estates management as kind of being isolated. Actually, it's got to be something that's tackled from all corners. Rani, I'm going to hand over to you because I've taken up a considerable amount of your time.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, next slide, please. Okay, so as mentioned, the role of the governing board in relation to estate management needs to remain strategic. Now, a big part of this strategic role will be ensuring that there is an effective strategic plan in place. To help governing boards do this, the DfE expects schools to have an estate vision. This is your high-level statement that provides direction for the estate in the medium to long term. Now, this vision doesn't need to be particularly complex or lengthy. Following on from this, there should then be an estate strategy. This is your medium-term strategic document that will set out your key activities and potential options for achieving that vision that was originally set. This strategy will be supported by a 3 to 5 year budget plan. And finally, you have your asset management plan. This is your short to medium term plan that details and prioritises the actions which are needed to fulfil the estate strategy. Now, it's the asset management plan that will inform your day-to-day operational activity. Now, although schools should have this information, how they do this and how they present this will depend on the estate management needs for their particular setting. And therefore, if appropriate, some schools may decide to include this in their wider school or trust vision and strategy. Next slide, please. So I'm now just going to talk a bit more about the different elements of strategic planning in a bit more detail. So without a clear estate vision, there is a risk that decisions relating to the estate are made in isolation, and they don't end up supporting the school or the governing board's educational vision. Now, this can result in resources being wasted. A good estate vision will help ensure that the estate can meet your setting's current and future education needs, and it provides clear direction for the estate strategy, and this will hopefully help inform decision making. The vision should show how the important elements of the educational vision will be achieved through the estate. So say, for example, the school or the trust has an educational vision to develop a specialisation such as sports provision in the next 5 years. That's your educational vision, and the estate vision will reflect that, and so it might include something about providing the necessary space and facilities to develop that required specialism. Now, as with the vision for the school or the trust, the estate vision should consider both educational and local community needs. The estate vision is something that should be set and approved by the governing board, and it should set out what needs to happen in relation to the estate in the medium to long term. Next slide, please. So once the board has approved that estate vision, you need to start thinking about what needs to be done to achieve it. The board should view the strategy as a 3 to 5 year medium to long term plan. The estate strategy should reflect what the board wants to achieve in the vision and make clear what is needed from the estate's perspective to achieve it. It should identify issues that will need further consideration and allow the board to list potential options that will help achieve what the school or the trust wants. The strategy should also identify what needs to be considered further to help shortlist your options. Now, at this stage, the options won't be analysed in detail, although any options that you do present should be realistic and achievable. And finally, the strategy should set out specific outcomes and timescales. As with the vision for the school or the trust, the estate strategy should be approved at board level. Some factors the governing board should consider include things like your financial issues. So what is a realistic budget for this strategy? Are there any financial constraints? Is any of the budget time limited? Are there maybe separate funding streams that can be brought together to support some common goals? There will be educational issues to think about. So will there be an impact on existing school operations? Is there a chance you'll lose existing facilities? And do the changes reflect the current and future needs of the curriculum that your board envisages? Given we're talking about estates, there is a possibility that there will be legal and title issues to take into account. So is land ownership clear? Is there any additional land required? Will you require any approvals or consents, and what's the processes for that? Finally, community expectations should also be factored in. Will the local community benefit? Will they support your plans? Are their expectations clearly articulated? And also, do your plans support the wider educational need in the local area? Next slide, please. So moving on to the asset management plan. Now, to put the vision strategy into place, schools will need to have an asset management plan. So in practice, you can liken this as the operational document similar to what your school development plan is. Now, we've already mentioned this. We are acutely aware of the struggles that governing boards face with balancing what you want to do and what you need to do to meet your statutory and educational objectives, all against a background of limited resources. So being clear on what resources are available and what they need to be used for will help ensure resources are used as efficiently as possible and provide clarity for all involved. The asset management plan will be informed by various factors, including the organisation, the finances and property performance, safety matters such as health and safety legislation and other statutory compliance, and any existing land and building issues. The plan should detail and prioritise what actions are needed to fulfil the estate strategy. It should clearly set out how building and maintenance work will be prioritised. Effective planning will help ensure that the school or the trust has the best opportunity to efficiently source and procure property and construction related services and reduce reactive estate management. Where relevant, the asset management plan should identify relevant policies and procedures related to the estate. It should be clear where responsibilities and decision-making powers lie, and so the asset management plan should describe the decision-making arrangements and reporting structures in place. To help maximise the efficiency of working practices, the plan should ensure that activities have a specific purpose and that resources are not wasted. As much of the work involving the estate will have some crossover, a good plan will help with effective coordination and management and reduce the possibility of duplication. Incorporating all the land and buildings related data will help ensure that the plan is all fully informed. And further, reference to all land and buildings is especially important for those schools that are split across multiple sites and for MATs who will obviously have responsibility for multiple buildings. Overall, a well thought out asset management plan will help ensure that all aspects of the estate remain safe and fit for purpose. It will allow for informed decision making, taking into account the current condition and performance of the estate, and potentially have financial benefits too. A good plan will make the maximum use of properties within the school or trust estate. Now, as with other aspects of estate management, the asset management plan should complement the education, vision, strategy and school development plan for the school or trust. Next slide, please. Now, we've talked a lot about the transformative estate works, but actually maintenance day-to-day should also form a key part of the estate. The intention should be to plan as much long-term and short-term maintenance to avoid carrying out works reactively. The DfE Good Estate Management Guidance quotes the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, which recommends allocating planned preventative maintenance and reactive maintenance budgets in the region of a 70-30 ratio. The maintenance plan may cover a 3 to 5 year period, but should also include a schedule of works to be undertaken in each year, which will cover the more regular day-to-day maintenance. If the estate is not properly maintained, it could have serious implications. For example, closure or partial closure of your buildings, invalidation of your insurance, shorter building life, or risks to health and safety and the welfare of your building users, or non-compliance with the regulations, some of which could lead to costly legal claims. However, any of the above could lead to unnecessary additional expenditure in order to rectify problems and possibly disrupt the education of pupils, some of which could have been avoided altogether. The planning of maintenance should include both regular planned maintenance works, including preventative works, and any planned capital or investment projects, such as things like window replacements. We would expect the plan to be informed by the current condition of the buildings identified from condition surveys. Governing boards will obviously not be involved in the creation of the maintenance plan, but should seek assurances that it exists, that it's fit for purpose, and that the progress is properly monitored. In practice, an update could be included in the head teacher's report or be an item on the agenda for a meeting of the full board or the relevant committee. Effective planning of maintenance works can also have a financial and non-financial benefit. A well-maintained estate is less likely to need unplanned emergency works, which are not only disruptive as they allow for less flexibility when scheduling them, but they can also require a premium to be paid to contractors. Finally, the maintenance plan and vision and strategy should feed into each other. For example, if the maintenance plan reveals potential long-term work, this should be considered in the next review of the estate and vision strategy. Likewise, if the vision and strategy are reviewed, this may affect the maintenance plan. Next slide, please. So once the board has their vision, strategy and asset management in place, they will need to monitor how these are being applied in their school or trust. What approach they take and the questions they will need to ask will depend on the estate itself. And so in order to be able to effectively monitor the effectiveness of the estate management strategy and plans, the governing board will need to build their knowledge of the estate in areas such as the size and location. So where are your buildings located? Are they maybe prone to flooding, etc.? The age of the building. Newer buildings are not immune to issues, but obviously they will present different challenges than older buildings. The building materials used, as recently evidenced with the problems related to RAAC. Governing boards should be aware of the condition of the buildings and have an understanding of what issues exist and monitor the progress of any steps to remedy them. A thorough knowledge of all of this will help identify and mitigate any potential risks. So as with so many areas of governance, good reporting procedures are also vital. In order to monitor the effectiveness of estate management, the governing board needs to have the necessary information. So key sources of information when talking about estate management would be things like your findings from condition surveys. These are normally non-intrusive surveys and they are carried out by suitable qualified professionals. They should identify specific building condition issues, any deficiencies and maintenance requirements. And these will apply to estate elements such as roofs, windows and doors, sewage and draining. A further source will be relevant audits, summarised with key points and further actions highlighted. Relevant members of staff could provide reports to the board covering selected estate performance measures. Now, these performance measures should have been agreed between the governing board and senior leaders based on the strategic priorities of the setting. The board should also be updated on progress relating to the asset management plan. Using this information, governors and trustees can, where appropriate, benchmark relevant performance measures against other similar schools or trust estates. Next slide, please. So as with other areas of governance, part of the role will be to seek assurances from the senior leader that the strategic direction from the board is being effectively implemented on an operational level. Governors and trustees should therefore assure themselves that the estate is safe and secure for everyone, that there is an awareness of what investment is needed, and that planning is taking place for longer term needs as well as the short term. Resources should be allocated in line with strategic priorities, and budgets are being used in the best possible way. All land and buildings should be used efficiently, and where possible, value is being drawn from the estate. For example, are all potential lettings being explored and utilised? Boards should ask whether senior leaders have looked for opportunities to collaborate with other schools or trusts with a view of being more efficient. Senior leaders should also provide assurances that the school or trust is prepared for an unexpected estate-related incident or failure. Next slide, please. In addition to working on strategic plans in relation to the estate, the board will need to be confident that the school or trust has the necessary resource to effectively implement them. Board should therefore ensure that there exists appropriate staffing capacity. Relevant members of staff should have the necessary skills, knowledge and experience. Some considerations for the governing board will be whether staff have the necessary skill set. If not, will training for existing staff suffice, or should new staff with specialist skills be recruited? Is there scope for sharing skills and resources with other schools and trusts? And if specific expertise is only occasionally needed, is it preferable to buy that in rather than employ someone full-time? Next slide, please. So before I finish, I just want to highlight our new guidance on estates management. So there are two guides on the website, one for MATs, which provides guidance on where the various estate management functions can sit within the different tiers of governance, and a second for single schools aimed at maintaining schools and single academy trusts. The guides cover the board's role in strategic planning, ensuring compliance, managing the resources, and it also includes questions that governors and trustees could ask their senior leaders. Thank you. I'll hand you back over to Sam.
Unmute, sorry. Kept myself on mute. Thank you so much, Rani. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate there's lots of comments and questions in the chat, which Rani and I will go through at the end. Like I said at the beginning, apologies we can answer as we go along. But also I think I did spot there were some things that did come up around, this is all very well, but what do we do when there's no money? Which absolutely is something, we both, Rani and I, govern as well. And, our experience is very much the same. So we do meet with the DfE's estates team. So we'll be feeding that back, as well as the conversations we have with the DfE in various capacities as well. But yeah, thank you so much for those points, and we'll do our best to follow each one up where we possibly can. But as we mentioned, we've got the guidance on the website as well, so please do have a look at that. Like I said at the beginning, today very much is about pointers and thinking about the topic and looking at the things that need to be thought of. We completely appreciate that there is a lot more to unpick as well, and so we'll be doing more on this area over the academic year. Just to flag up with you very quickly before we go, some upcoming events. You can see there our list of events, starting with our governance leadership forums next week on the 18th. I think that's really important for you to come and have a say in that, because as I've just mentioned, as with lots of the comments pointing out the fact that funding is a major issue to all of this, what we will do is make sure there is time for you to talk directly to the department's officials who will be attending that. So it is very much a chance to have your say with the department, and other events on the horizon, including our annual seminar sessions in November. So please do book onto them and our annual address and AGM on the 17th of November. Next slide, please, Sabrine. Just to flag up, our membership survey is currently open. So if you've got feedback and views you want to share with us on your membership and the benefits that you get, and any suggestions for improvement, and please do that. And then my last few slides are just to flag up a few other things. We've got our Learning Link slide there for those of you who don't have Learning Link. That's just to flag that with you, and our brand new Governing a Multi-Academy Trust handbook for trustees in a multi-academy trust. which was released last week. So if you govern in a MAT, or you're just interested in that, then do please have a look at that. And I think all that's left for me to say is thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time, and like I said, we'll do our best to come back to those questions and points that have been raised in the chat. Thank you.